back!
Let's go, Voltron!
Form, arms, and torso!
Voltron, defender of the universe.
Voltron, defender of the universe.
Listen up, because I'm about to tell you the story of how 5 robot lions became a cultural phenomenon that defined a generation, and then almost disappeared completely because of lead paint. Yeah, you heard that right, lead paint. The tech behind Voltron wasn't just cool animation, it was a complete reinvention of Japanese anime that changed Saturday morning cartoons forever. But here's the thing, most people don't know. Voltron wasn't supposed to exist at all. It was basically a happy accident born from desperation, syndication math, and a couple of guys in St. Louis who saw something nobody else did. But get this, the most impressive part of the whole Voltron story isn't how it became a massive hit in 1984. It's how spectacularly it all came crashing down just 2 years later, taking millions of dollars and countless childhood memories with it. In this video, I'm going to reveal the untold story of Voltron, from the serendipitous mistake that created it, to the innovative techniques that made it revolutionary, to the toxic disaster that nearly killed it forever. And trust me, this story has more twists than a season finale. By the way, I've spent weeks digging through the actual history of World Events Productions, the legal battles, and the behind-the-scenes chaos that most fans never knew about. This isn't just nostalgia. This is the real story. Let's get into it. The St. Louis Miracle. So here's where it all starts, and it's not where you'd think. Picture this. It's the early 1980s. You're not in Hollywood. You're not in New York. You're in St. Louis, Missouri. Not exactly the epicenter of the entertainment industry, right? But that's where a company called World Events Productions was operating, and they had a problem. See, there was this magic number in television syndication, 65 episodes. If you had 65 episodes of a show, you could run it Monday through Friday for 13 weeks straight, a full quarter of the year. Then you'd just loop it and start over. This was the golden ticket for syndication, the key to making real money in the TV business. World Events Productions knew this. They understood the game, but they needed content, and creating 65 original episodes of anything was expensive and time-consuming. So they did what any smart business person would do. They went shopping for existing content they could repackage. And that's when they stumbled onto something called Go Lion. Now, Go Lion was a Japanese anime that had aired in Japan in 1981 to 1982. It was about 5 robot lions that combined into one giant robot to fight evil. Pretty straightforward, right? But here's the kicker. Go Lion was dark. I'm talking really dark. There were scenes of slavery, graphic violence, and characters dying brutal deaths. This was not Saturday morning cartoon material by American standards. But the guys at World Events Productions, particularly Ted Koppler and his team, they saw potential. They saw 5 robot lions. They saw epic space battles. And most importantly, they saw exactly 52 episodes of existing animation that they could acquire for relatively cheap. Wait, 52 episodes? But didn't I just say they needed 65? Exactly. And that's where the serendipity of error comes in. They bought Go Lion thinking they could make it work, but they were 13 episodes short of that magic syndication number. So what did they do? They went back and bought another Japanese anime called Dairugger 15, which Americans would come to know as the vehicle Voltron. But even that wasn't quite enough, so they planned for a third series called Albagus, which would become Voltron 2. Spoiler alert, that one never happened, but we'll get to that disaster later. The point is, Voltron wasn't created by some visionary animator with a grand plan. It was cobbled together by businessmen in St. Louis trying to hit a syndication quota. And somehow, it became one of the most beloved cartoons of the 1980s. That's the magic of Voltron. It was never supposed to work, but it absolutely did. The narrative, alchemy, and technical vanguard. Alright, so they've got the footage. They've got these Japanese anime shows with robot lions and vehicle teams. But now comes the hard part. How do you take content made for Japanese audiences and turn it into something American kids would go crazy for? This is where World Events Productions got creative. And by creative, I mean they completely rewrote everything. First, they had to deal with the violence problem. Remember, Go Lion had some seriously intense stuff. People getting killed, blood, the whole 9 yards. American broadcast standards in 1984 were not having that, so the writers had to perform what I call narrative alchemy, turning graphic death scenes into something more palatable. Their solution? The robot warrior paradigm. Whenever someone was about to die in the original Japanese version, the American script would explain that they were actually robots, or they'd been transported to another dimension, or they'd escaped at the last second. It was censorship workaround 101, but it worked. Then there were the names. Everything got Americanized. The Japanese character Kogane Akira became Keith. Kurogane Isamu became Lance. Princess Fala became Princess Allura. And the evil Emperor Daibazal? He became King Zarkon, which honestly sounds way more menacing. But here's what's really interesting. They didn't just translate the dialogue. They completely rewrote the story. The original Go Lion had this whole backstory about Earth being destroyed in a nuclear war. The American version? They scrapped that entirely and created this new mythology about the planet Eris and the Galaxy Alliance. And get this, they added a Buck Rogers influence. The writers were clearly fans of that 25th century sci-fi aesthetic, so they leaned into it hard. Voltron became less about post-apocalyptic survival and more about space exploration and defending the galaxy. It was a complete tonal shift, but it resonated with American audiences who were still riding high on Star Wars fever. The voice actors recorded everything in what can only be described as bedlam. They'd cram into a booth, sometimes multiple actors at once, and just bang out dialogue as fast as they could. It wasn't the most sophisticated production, but it had energy, it had personality, and most importantly, it had heart. The writers and voice actors took what could have been a cheap cash grab and turned it into something kids genuinely cared about. They created characters we rooted for, villains we loved to hate, and a world that felt alive despite being cobbled together from repurposed footage. That's the real genius of Voltron. It was a Frankenstein's monster of international content that somehow became more than the sum of its parts. Now let's talk about something that doesn't get nearly enough credit. Voltron was technically revolutionary for its time. You've got to remember, this is 1984. Most cartoons were still being broadcast in mono sound, just one audio channel. It was flat, it was basic, but it was cheap and it worked. But World Events Productions decided to do something different. They made Voltron one of the first animated series to be broadcast in stereo sound. I know. That doesn't sound like a big deal now, when we've got Dolby Atmos and surround sound and all that. But in 1984, this was cutting-edge stuff. When Voltron formed and that iconic theme music kicked in, it hit different if you had a stereo TV. The explosions had depth. The lion roars came from different directions. It was immersive in a way that other cartoons just weren't. This wasn't just about sounding cool, though that was definitely part of it. It was about creating an experience. World Events Productions understood that if they wanted Voltron to stand out in a crowded Saturday morning lineup, they needed every advantage they could get. And it worked. Kids noticed. Parents noticed. The stereo sound became part of Voltron's identity. It made the show feel more cinematic, more important, more real than other cartoons. This is something I think modern creators forget sometimes. Innovation doesn't always have to be flashy or obvious. Sometimes it's about taking existing technology and being the first to apply it in a new way. Voltron didn't invent stereo sound, but they were pioneers in bringing it to Saturday morning cartoons, and that mattered. The toyetic boom. Alright, now we get to the good stuff, the absolute zenith of Voltron's success. 1984 to 1985 was peak Voltron. The show was a hit. Kids were obsessed. And then Matchbox, yes, the toy car company, stepped in with the Voltron toy line. And let me tell you, these toys were everywhere. The main attraction was the Deluxe Lion Voltron set. You got all 5 lions, Black Lion, Red Lion, Green Lion, Blue Lion, and Yellow Lion, and they actually combined into Voltron. It wasn't perfect. The proportions were a bit off, and it was kinda clunky. But for a kid in 1984, this was the holy grail of toys. Matchbox went all in. They made die-cast metal versions for durability. They created action figures of all the main characters. They even made playsets like the Castle of Lions. The toy line was comprehensive, well made, and most importantly, it was selling like crazy. We're talking millions of dollars in revenue. Voltron toys were the must-have Christmas gift of 1984. If you were a kid and you didn't have at least one Voltron lion, you were missing out on playground conversations. It was that level of cultural saturation. And here's the thing. The toys fed back into the show's popularity, which fed back into toy sales, which fed back into the show. It was a perfect synergy between content and merchandise. This is what every entertainment property dreams of achieving. World Events Productions was riding high. They had a hit show, a successful toy line, and they were already planning expansions. Vehicle Voltron was in production to give them more content. They were commissioning new episodes. The future looked incredibly bright. But here's what nobody saw coming. The entire empire was about to come crashing down because of something completely avoidable. The catastrophic fall. That's when everything went wrong. You remember how I mentioned lead paint at the beginning? Yeah, we're there now. So here's what happened. Matchbox had been manufacturing these Voltron toys, and like a lot of toy companies in the mid-80s, some of their production involved paint that contained lead. This wasn't unusual at the time. Lead paint was cheaper and more durable, but it was also, toxic. In 1986, safety regulations caught up with the toy industry. Testing revealed that some Voltron toys had lead paint levels that exceeded safety standards. And when I say some, I mean a significant portion of the toy line. The result? A massive recall. Matchbox had to pull Voltron toys off shelves across the country. Retailers sent back inventory. Parents who'd bought the toys were told to return them. And just like that, the Voltron toy empire collapsed. But it gets worse. The recall didn't just hurt Matchbox, it poisoned the entire Voltron brand. Parents became wary. Retailers didn't want to stock Voltron products anymore. The show's ratings started to slip because the merchandising machine that had been driving awareness suddenly stopped. World Events Productions tried to pivot. They'd already been working on Vehicle Voltron as a way to extend the franchise, but that never captured the same magic as Lion Voltron. Kids wanted the lions, not a team of vehicles that combined into a robot. It just wasn't the same. And remember that third Voltron series I mentioned, Voltron 2, based on the anime Albigus? They straight up abandoned it. The plan had been to create this trilogy of Voltron series, but after the lead paint disaster, there was no appetite for expansion. Voltron 2 never made it to American television. The financial hit was devastating. We're talking millions of dollars in lost revenue, not just from the recalled toys, but from the entire merchandising ecosystem that collapsed around it. Licensing deals fell through. Plans for theatrical releases got shelved. By 1987, Voltron had gone from cultural phenomenon to cautionary tale. The show limped along for a bit, but the momentum was gone. The magic had evaporated. And here's the really frustrating part. This was completely preventable. If Matchbox had used lead-free paint from the start, if they'd been more careful with their manufacturing standards, Voltron might have continued dominating the toy aisles for years. Instead, a cost-cutting decision destroyed one of the most successful franchises of the decade. But wait, there's more drama. Because while Voltron was collapsing publicly, there was a whole other war happening behind the scenes. First, you had internal conflict at World Events Productions. Peter Keefe, one of the key creative forces behind Voltron's adaptation, ended up in disputes with Ted Koppler over creative control and financial arrangements. These weren't just disagreements. These were full-blown legal battles over who owned what and who deserved credit for Voltron's success. Then there was the international drama with Toei Animation, the Japanese company that had created the original Go Lion anime. See, World Events Productions had licensed the footage, but the exact terms of that license became disputed. Toei felt they weren't getting their fair share of the massive American success. World Events Productions felt they'd transformed the content into something entirely new and deserved the lion's share, pun intended, of the profits. This led to years of legal wrangling that made it incredibly difficult to do anything new with Voltron. Want to make a movie? Better make sure the rights are clear. Want to create new episodes? Hope you've got your licensing agreements in order. And then there's the Nakamura revelation, this weird footnote in Voltron history where it came out that there had been discussions about a Voltron theatrical film in the mid-80s. But those plans hit an impasse, partly because of the legal complications, and partly because, well, the brand was toxic after the lead paint recall. The behind-the-scenes chaos meant that even when there was interest in reviving Voltron, it was nearly impossible to get all the parties to agree. The property was stuck in legal limbo, while other franchises like Transformers and G.I. Joe continued to thrive. It's a reminder that sometimes the biggest obstacles to success aren't external, they're internal. Voltron didn't just fail because of lead paint. It failed because the people who created it couldn't agree on how to move forward. So, what's the legacy of Voltron? On one hand, it's a story of incredible success. A couple of guys in St. Louis took Japanese anime that wasn't meant for American audiences, completely reimagined it, and created a cultural phenomenon that defined Saturday morning cartoons for an entire generation. They innovated with stereo sound, created compelling characters, and built a merchandising empire. On the other hand, it's a cautionary tale about how quickly success can evaporate. One bad decision, using lead paint to save a few bucks, destroyed years of work and millions of dollars in value. And the legal infighting ensured that Voltron could never fully recover its momentum. But here's the thing. Voltron survived. It came back in the 90s with new series. It got rebooted on Netflix in 2016. The franchise is still around because the core concept, 5 robot lions combining into one giant defender, is just that good. The rise and fall of Voltron teaches us something important. Great ideas can come from unexpected places. Innovation matters even in small ways. And success is fragile. You can do everything right and still have it all fall apart because of one mistake. For those of us who grew up with Voltron, though, none of the drama matters as much as the memories. We remember racing home to catch the show. We remember playing with those toys, lead paint and all. We remember arguing about which lion was the coolest. That's the real legacy of Voltron. Not the business deals or the legal battles, but the impact it had on a generation of kids who just wanted to see 5 robot lions save the universe. And honestly, that's pretty cool. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane and learned something new about a show you thought you knew everything about, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories like this, the untold histories of the things that shaped our childhoods. And trust me, they're all just as wild as Voltron's.